The world today is being reordered, remade, into a place that looks just like the one described to us by ancient Hebrew prophets in the Bible. One such initiative for a planet-wide reordering comes from the World Economic Forum. They call it the Great Reset. The World Economic Forum, or WEF, meets every January in the alpine town of Davos, Switzerland. It is an invitation-only event funded by 1,000 of the biggest companies in the world. According to the WEF, in 2018, there were more than 3,000 participants from nearly 110 countries. The event included more than 340 public figures, including more than 70 heads of state and government. At their January 2021 meeting, the WEF says it will be planning something enormous, a global economic reset, and they believe they have the power and reach to do it. On their website, they say the Great Reset Initiative has a set of dimensions to build a new social contract. Now stop and think about that for a second. That is big. According to the Oxford Dictionary, theories of a social contract became popular in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries as a means of explaining the origin of government and the obligations of subjects. The last stanza of Robert Frost's famous poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, says, "The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep. And miles to go before I sleep." When asked what promises, Frost answered, "Those that I myself make for myself and those that my ancestors made for me," known as the social contract. And now the World Economic Forum has decided to use the COVID-19 crisis as a means to rewrite the social contract for the entire world. They're calling it the Great Reset. So, who is the WEF? In his book, America and the New World Order, Pastor Tom Hughes wrote, "The World Economic Forum brings business, academic, and government leaders together. They have become a government think tank for the world, even though there is nothing official about them. Who elected them to this leadership role? The elites elected themselves." For the first 13 years of this century, the Davos event was besieged with massive protests. And then, mysteriously, in 2014, the protests began to shrink, all but disappearing entirely. Something happened. Harvard professor Samuel Huntington invented the term Davos Man to describe participants in the WEF's annual Davos event. He said that these members of the global elite have little need for national loyalty, view national boundaries as obstacles that thankfully are vanishing, and see national governments as residues from the past, whose only useful function is to facilitate the elite's global operations. The World Economic Forum is not the only group planning to use COVID-19 as a reason to reorder civilization on a planetary scale. They have just made the ambitions that they hold more public than most.
The COVID-19 crisis has shown us that our old systems are not fit anymore for the 21st century.
Over the past 3 decades, the elites have tried to use climate change as a catalyst for world government. Remember Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030 or others? In June of 2015, Pope Francis issued his encyclical on climate change. International negotiations, he wrote, cannot make significant progress due to positions taken by countries which place their national interests above the global common good. There is urgent need of a true world political authority, one authoritative source of oversight and coordination, which lays down rules for admissible conduct in light of the common good. Continuity is essential because policies related to climate change and environmental protection cannot be altered with every change of government. In democracies, Changes of government are known as elections. He's calling for elections to be subjugated to the will of an elite few who would write unalterable laws. The laws have to be unalterable because we need that continuity. Pope Francis used climate change and economic inequality to push for global government and a massive worldwide redistribution of wealth. Today, globalists pushing for the reset have added COVID-19 to that list. Let me quickly say that I'm not anti-Catholic. I don't view the Catholic Church in the way a lot of prophecy teachers do. But I have some big problems with Pope Francis. The UN Secretary General has been pushing hard for multilateral agreements between nations. Unilateral means one nation acting alone. Bilateral means two nations acting together. Multilateral means three or more nations working together, for example, in trade deals. The problem with a multilateral trade deal is that the trade federations they create become their own governments, whose authority must supersede that of the constitutions and laws of those nations that join such federations. A multilateral agreement requires such intrusive authority in order to make it fair. Let me give you an example. If you have a free trade agreement between nations, and one nation has really strict laws on child labor, for instance, or environmental protection, then that nation with those stricter laws would be at a disadvantage to a nation with less strict laws, because those laws would make things more expensive to produce. So they have to have new super laws that rank above the old national laws, super laws regarding things like labor and environment. President Trump pulled the plug on the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership before it could be fully realized, but it makes a good example of how these large multilateral trade groups work. The agreement would have created its own new government known as the Trans-Pacific Partnership Commission, usually shortened to just the Commission. The nations in the pact would have been answerable to the Commission. It would have had its own courts and enforcement mechanisms. It had its own laws on immigration, wealth redistribution, education, and human rights. This included children's rights, which give the Commission the ability to reach past state, local, and federal governments and move right into the homes of Americans and other signatory states. It had provisions on same-sex marriage, gun control, health care, women's reproductive rights, abortion, and sustainable development. The Commission would have had authority to protect fish, seals, trees, wetlands, etc. It had the right to protect water and land. That's everything. It could use its own definition of pollution, by the way. It got to choose that. And limit where people would be able to live and work. The Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership would have placed people under the control of a ruling elite that ordinary citizens could not vote on and would not be able to remove or replace. Each nation would have the ability to leave the partnership, but at grave economic costs. And short of leaving the partnership, each nation would remain completely vulnerable to the whims of its partners. The Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership came to a screeching halt shortly after Donald Trump became president, but it could easily come back, and soon. Some have proposed sectioning the world into 10 massive trade federations. These might be what the Bible is referring to when it speaks to 10 kingdoms that will form, then transfer their power to the Antichrist. All of the things I've been talking about fit perfectly with end times Bible prophecy. If you have never done so, it's time right now to turn your life over to Jesus Christ. Please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook. Look for the next program the last week of August. God willing, I'll see you then.